Page 474, lesson 8.4 is on frequency tables and histograms. So before we get going on this too much, a frequency table shows the number of times a value occurs in each category or interval. Normally when we're doing frequency tables, we're going to try to have intervals of 5 or 10 and 3 to 6 groups. It just makes it easier for you to go through and do it that way. Now again, it's going to vary. It's not always going to be that, but for sure having 3 to 6 groups is a good idea. If you only have 2 groups, it really doesn't split it up enough to give an idea of where a lot of the numbers are. And if you have more than 6 groups, then it gets to be a lot of work for you to split it up into that many different groups. So that's what we're going to try to do if we can. Again, we won't always be able to do that, but that's going to be a goal anyway. And then a histogram is a graph that uses bars to show numbers of values in each category or interval. And I know it kind of looks like there's a little bit of a gap here in your book, but with a histogram, a difference with this versus a just regular bar graph is that the bars are always going to be touching each other. And then also, well, that's the main difference, I guess. Sometimes, depending what the numbers are, sometimes if this doesn't start at 0, you might have to have a little break to show that it doesn't start at 0. But I don't know if they're getting into that too much here. Anyway, so if we go back to looking at example 1 then, Mr. Maxwell timed the cross-country team in a 2-mile run and recorded the times in the table shown. He wants to analyze the runner's times. What is one way Mr. Maxwell can organize the data? Well, these would be 2 different ways. And you can see on this first one, the frequency table. Here's our frequency table. There's 3 different columns. So the first one they called running times, and they've got those in groups of about 2-minute intervals. And then the tally is like how many times those show up. And then the frequency is just how many tally marks that you have. And then once you have a frequency table, a way to visually display that is to do a histogram. So what they did is they just took the information and they made the histogram. So that really visually we can see, oh, most people, there's more people in the 16 to 1759 group than any other group. One thing to make sure of when you do the histogram is you need to make sure you have a title, and you need to make sure you have labels for the x-axis and the y-axis. So in this case we have team times is the title, minutes on our x-axis, and number of runners on the y-axis. So somebody could look at this even without seeing any of the other information. They would have a little bit of an idea about what our histogram is representing here. So if you look at the try it, this histogram shows a different way to represent Mr. Maxwell's data. Fill in the boxes with appropriate times and shade the bars for the last 3 intervals. How have the intervals changed? So they just went with different intervals here. They're splitting up into 1-minute intervals instead of 2-minute intervals, basically. So if we filled this out, this interval, it would be 16 minutes to 16:59. Then they've got 17 to 17:59. So the next one would start at 18 minutes. Notice there's no overlaps between these times and there's no gaps in between it. Okay, and then our last interval. So 19 minutes to 19 minutes 59 seconds would be our last interval. And then we would just need to look at all the original times back at the top of the page to see how many would go in each of these last spots. So there are three. There's a 17 minute 14 seconds, 17 minutes 49 seconds, and 17 minutes 55 seconds. If you look at that up at the top of the page. So that gives us three. So we'll put a bar right next to this other one is 3. You don't have to make it to where you have to resharpen your pencil after every problem. So if you want to just do like that, that's fine. And for that next one, there's only one. There's a 18 minutes and 40 seconds. So that would just be a bar going up to 1. Again, put it right next to that other bar. And from 19 to 1959, there's only one as well, is 19 minutes and 15 seconds. So this would be what the histogram would look like if we went by 1 minute intervals instead of 2 minute intervals. And then over here it asks about how have the intervals changed. So we could say, like I just mentioned, the intervals are 1 minute instead of 2 minutes. And then basically it ended up, it wouldn't have to be this way, but it happened to split these up, split the bars up in half. So the one bar that went to 4, now it's split up to 2 bars that go to 2. And the bar that went to 6 happens to be 2 bars split up in 3 each. Again, they wouldn't have to be equally split like that. It just happens to be on this problem. Example 2, Zach surveys a group of middle school students and asks them how many texts they sent yesterday. The table shows the results. So on A it says, is the greatest number of texts sent between 60 and 79. So 60 to 79 is the greatest frequency. Okay, if we look at frequencies, that is the greatest frequency, but it's not the greatest number of texts that were sent. We don't know an exact number, but the greatest number of texts sent was between 80 and 99. Somewhere in that range. We don't know exactly where, but somewhere in that range. And then part B is the lowest number of texts sent between 20 and 39. Well, the lowest frequency, once again, is between 20 and 39, but the lowest number of texts sent is between 0 and 19. Okay? Presumably, I would say there should be people, I would think there'd be more on this end. People that have 0 that don't have phones and stuff, hopefully would be the case, that we're not getting into all this technology too early on. So the try it then says, how many students sent between 20 and 59 texts? So between 20 and 59, we can look at our frequency table. So we're trying to look at the groups from 20 to 59. That would be these two groups right here. And so to figure out how many people there were altogether in those groups, there were 4 in that first group and there were 10 in the second group. And so if we just add those together, that's a total of 14 students that sent between 20 and 59 texts. Example 3, the histogram shows the number of points Kendra scored during each basketball game she played last season. How many games did Kendra play last season? So if you look at this, you can see how many times she scored a certain number of points. So there were 3 games that she scored between 0 and 4 points. 6 games she scored from 10 to 14. 2 games she scored 15 to 19, and 1 game she got 20 to 24. So if we just add those numbers together, 3, 6, 2, and 1, and then that adds up to 12. And that's how they figured that out, that she played in a total of 12 games. Then part B says, how many games did she score from 5 to 9 points? So 5 to 9 points, if you'll notice, there's not a bar there. Okay? And just because it didn't happen, okay, the answer then would be none. There were no games that she scored 5 to 9 points. Okay? Just because it didn't happen, notice they didn't just skip over that and just go from 0 to 4 and then the next one go from 10 to 14. Okay? We still put that there because that shows that there's a gap. That shows there was a number of points that she didn't score ever in any of her games. So if you look at the try it, does the histogram show the mode of the number of points Kendra scored in the game? So in other words, just by looking at this histogram, can we tell the mode? In other words, can we tell what amount of points she scored most often or more often than any other number of points? And so actually we can't tell. 10 to 14, that range is the most frequent, but that's a range. That's not like just a number of points. I mean, it's possible in this 10 to 14, we don't know, but she could have gotten maybe a 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 14. Maybe that was what she got there. And then maybe over here, she had, maybe this was 2, 2, 2. So even though the bar is not as high, I mean, it doesn't even have to be in the 10 to 14 that what the mode is. Okay, so the answer again is no. So the histogram shows ranges of points scored, not individual values. So again, we cannot tell what the mode is for her points scored.